aspect of the media we interact with. And nowadays, there's so much of it coming at us because of the new technologies. When our perspective is sort of shaped by that, as I mentioned earlier, we get a negative viewpoint because journalism today, because it depends so much on eyeballs and ears and the number of them watching and listening, due to the need to have high ratings to survive, that is now prevalent in the news industry and hadn't been before in the early days. And over the years, over the decades, starting from a perspective way back in the 50s and 60s, that news was a part of the social responsibility that networks and television stations had in their agreement with us, the American people. We let them use our airwaves to show us, entertainment and sell us their products. And part of the deal was that they were to be, responsible providers of information for the general public. That has gradually eroded and become something that is now strictly monetarily based. You got to have high ratings, because the higher the ratings, the more you can charge for ad revenue, and that keeps the money coming in. So, how do you get eyeballs? How do you get ears? Well, put out something provocative. And generally, things that are provocative tend to be negative. Put out something shocking. That'll get attention. Even if the attention is short-lived, you got it. And it registers, and it's counted that we have this number of people in the audience, so now we can charge this much for ad revenue, and so forth and so on. So one of the perspectives, regarding this is that there seems to be a built-in bias towards the negative by journalism. It covers events, and it's easier for something to go wrong very quickly rather than right very quickly. Explosions, terrorist attacks, shootings, an epidemic can all break out quickly. Whereas improvements in well-being, like fewer wars, lower rates of crime, increasing longevity, literacy, prosperity, they take the long view. They may only go up a few points in a short period of time. And because we live in this world of very instantaneous, immediacy, it makes it look, or makes it seem as if not only aren't things changing, but they're deteriorating. And that's part of the illusion. As Mr. Pinker points out, these kinds of improvements, such as fewer wars, lower rates of crime, increasing longevity, etc., there's never a Thursday in October in which they happen all at once and then could be part of a news report. So, by looking at data rather than looking at or listening to immediate journalistic reports, it gives you the long view, so that when you're counting up the number of crimes, number of wars, people killed in war, the number of people who live below the line of extreme poverty, as well as the happy non-events that you get, you have a completely, a very different view of the world that is quite a bit more positive. Now, as I said, Mr. Pinker's, over the years I've been doing this show, it's sort of a go-to guy for inspiration. I mean, that's what this show is supposed to be. It's supposed to be about inspiring folks. But recently, whereas before this was very sort of galvanizing and inspiring, all of a sudden there's been this blowback against Mr. Pinker's most recent book. And part of it is the idea that somehow that perspective is deluding ourselves and making us not do what we need to do. So he, in a recent article marking sort of the first year of this book, sort of has written a response to the responses, where he says, you wouldn't think that a defense of reason, science, and humanism would be particularly controversial in an era in which those ideals would seem to need all the help they can get. But, in the words of a colleague, you've made people's heads explode. Many people who wrote about this book and wrote to him about the book have said they've been taken aback by the irate attacks from critics on both the right and the left. So far from embracing the beleaguered ideals of the Enlightenment, critics have blamed it for racism, imperialism, existential threats, and epidemics of loneliness, depression, and suicide. Well, there's some truth to that in sort of the original Enlightenment as it was 200 years ago. However, if you look at it today, you can see that racism and imperialism and existential threats, the very fact that we have an awareness of them, and there's a movement by many to continue to work on those issues, that in and of itself is amazing progress. Because if you go back 200 years, people didn't even realize that what they were doing wasn't right. So there's that. Taking the long view is very hard for a lot of people, because we tend to live in, not so much in the moment actually, because it would even be better if we did live in the moment. We'd be living more mindfully, but we tend to live for the moment rather than in the moment. And we tend to look at the things that are happening as things that are, number one, happening to us, and number two, that are essentially negative, and that triggers the fight or flight response in many. And of course, when you have a fight or flight response, what's necessary to counter that before you begin to get sick and have health issues, and your body begins to shut down, the counteraction to that is the relaxation response, which is triggered through things like mindfulness and meditation and taking a calmer approach, if you will, or taking that step back. And so I kind of feel like, as we've talked a lot on this show about the fear response and the relaxation response, I kind of look at it now as if the entire country and even globally is experiencing a fight or flight response, which is causing the global body to become ill, start to shut down, start to have issues of stress and depression, loneliness, suicide. There's new information showing that some of the most ardent supporters of things like gun rights, a lot of what many people feel are right-wing positions, or sort of nationalist or even white nationalist perspectives, that they are committing suicide at a much higher rate, which is an interesting kind of phenomena. These people who are talking about, how the white man is being wiped out, are wiping themselves out faster than anything else that's going on in the world right now. So there are those, back to this response or this backlash against a positive outlook on the world. These people insist that human progress can only be an illusion of cherry-picked data. And they say that the Enlightenment is an idea whose time has passed, soon to be killed off by authoritarian populism, social media, or artificial intelligence. And so in response to this, basically he says, so many of these people miss the book's point. Enlightenment Now is the name of the book. Makes the case for reason, science, humanism, and progress. It does not make the case for a bunch of guys who wrote in the 18th century. Of course, the Enlightenment had fuzzy boundaries and was influenced by ideas that preceded it and embraced thinkers who disagreed with each other, and who had some maybe not so socially progressive ideas. And perhaps perhaps it's the choice of words that he has, the choosing of the word enlightenment for the title. But what he means by enlightenment has less to do with what they're talking about, which was this group of men in the 18th century who started this movement called the Enlightenment. These thinkers of the 18th century. And he gives a defense on why he chose that word. I think he could have maybe done better on the title. But to his surprise, there was this backlash of people who probably I don't think actually read the book.